You know, basically, I had people coming in my house all the time and supporting me. We decided to do it that way for a very deliberate reason, and that was that we didn't know how serious this was at that point, but I knew that in order for us to focus on our family life and our relationships with each other, that I needed that kind of infrastructure support. If I didn't have it, I was going to be consumed with those kinds of details and I wouldn't really be able to pay attention to the relationships. So I made that decision right at the very beginning. Once he finished interferon, we kind of happily sent the support people away, home, thinking, okay, we've done our business. He looked at the stats. It seemed reasonable to expect that maybe he could live. We weren't thinking of it as terminal at that point. And about the time that spring, so that would have been the spring of 2005, in about April, when we'd gotten through the real crisis, what we thought was the crisis at the time, he and I were having a fight in the kitchen, like you do when the crisis is over, right? Like now we're relaxed enough to really take it out on each other. And we're fighting, and he reaches up to his cheek, he's thinking, and all of a sudden he pauses, and there's this look on his face, and I know that something's wrong. And I say, what? And he said, there's something there. So there's a little tiny subcutaneous, what we thought, was hoping was a cyst, turned out to be a growth, and it was melanoma. And so they went ahead and did a PET scan, and they found a tumor in his liver. So now it's terminal, and that was in the spring of 2005. We freaked out, as anybody does. My daughter was about to graduate from high school. My son was about to turn 13. We were told, so what happened at this point is that we started to craft our relationship to illness. What he ended up doing was he decided to really press into the doctors. And what he found out was that melanoma at that stage, at that time, which was about 7 years ago, really didn't have any good treatment. They don't use chemo. There was nothing to radiate. It was in the bloodstream. It was going to go for, you know, the tender organs like livers. And when he went to SCCA to talk to the experts and really press in about what that meant, he was told that he had a 4 to 9 month prognosis, that even though he didn't have symptoms in this moment, he would have symptoms for sure by 4 months. So we were kind of in this bind, and Julian was a very sort of robust, optimistic person, quite the opposite of me. And so he is sort of up for a fight, and he'd always been really interested in boxing, and he'd watched a lot of boxing in his life. And so he did his thing about, okay, I'm going to fight this thing. He'd do this thing with his nose, and we're going to win, right? Which I sense have seen a lot of cancer patients do. There's this moment of identity that comes with the fighter, right? Or the fighter we start to craft our identity around that. And so he thought, well, I'll go do this interleukin-2. There's nothing else to do. And luckily for us, we had been doing a lot of work on ourselves in an environment where we had people who were willing to challenge us. And it wasn't that that treatment was the wrong decision. It was just that we weren't able, as most people aren't in that moment, to really open up our thinking, right? And so we had teachers and therapists who started to challenge us about, are you really thinking about this? Does this really make sense? And we both, each of us, Julian and I, had to do our own process around this. And I took it in deeply, I took the challenge in deeply, and what I realized is if I were looking at the conventional treatment that was offered as an alternative treatment, I would reject it out of hand because the odds were too bad, really, and the side effects were too great, right? And he did his own machinations around this, and he pretty much decided, I think the basis of his decision was, if I only have 4 months, I don't want to take one of those in the hospital, and I don't want to spend whatever time recovering after that. I mean, everything was becoming very precious at this moment. So he did the research, and he decided, you know what? the system doesn't have much to offer me, and so I'm going to turn my attention and see if I can figure out another way to approach this. He found a treatment protocol that made sense to him, and he decided to commit to it. And he's somebody who would have said, you know, it wasn't that he felt like whatever he chose was the thing that everybody else should choose, and I think this would be true of his decision to use death with dignity too, but that he felt like it was important in his life, and when he talked to people, you know, people would come to him and ask him about these things. He would say, I don't know what you should choose, but I know you should do the work to get down deep with yourself and allow for a period of discrimination, and when you choose, fully commit. And that's what he did. So he committed to an alternative treatment protocol that included a bunch of stuff: detox, supplements, diet, you know, the kinds of things that people do. And you know, honestly, I don't think I thought it would work, but there was nothing else to do, really. And it was his decision to make, honestly. So I supported him. I tried to hold in mind that he'd been given this lethal diagnosis, but that he wasn't sick, right? Like, a lot of people aren't sick when they get these diagnoses. And, you know, could I live with that tension? And he committed to life at that moment, knowing that basically the gun was at his head.